The palace walls had witnessed whispers before, but nothing prepared them for the night Queen Camilla was publicly humiliated and brought to tears as Princess Catherine executed a move no one dared imagine. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was the sound of a monarchy splintering. It began like any other royal evening, cloaked in grandeur and ceremony, but beneath the shimmering lights and carefully rehearsed protocols, lingered an unease, too sharp to ignore. Whispers had spread across the corridors of Buckingham Palace in the days leading up to this night. Rumors of a secret decree, a move so daring it could fracture the monarchy's very core. The courtiers, usually steady and unshaken, could not disguise their glances furtive, anxious, as though each expected a revelation that might pull the ground from beneath their feet. Camilla, dressed in her usual composure, stepped into the grand hall, convinced the night would be hers to command. She believed recognition was waiting, honors that reinforced her place beside Charles as his chosen queen. Yet as she moved among dignitaries, laughter polite and words rehearsed, she could not ignore the odd stiffness in the air. The conversations were hushed, the applause thin, and even the familiar staff who once bowed eagerly now avoided her gaze. The atmosphere trembled with an anticipation that had nothing to do with celebration. Across the hall stood Catherine, her presence almost magnetic, her aura different from what the world had grown accustomed to. She did not simply appear elegant, she appeared resolute. Her posture was not of one attending a ceremony, but of one presiding over it. Those around her shifted unconsciously, gravitating toward her strength, as though they sensed the balance of power tilting in real time. Her silence that evening was louder than words. She smiled, but behind her composure was a conviction sharper than any blade. And Camilla, for all her confidence, felt its edge pressing closer. Even those who had long served the crown, the seasoned, aides and advisors who had weathered decades of scandal and power plays, sensed that history was shifting before their eyes. The tension was not born from chaos, but from inevitability. It was as though the palace itself had grown still, bracing for the weight of what was about to unfold. Rumors had circulated for weeks of Catherine holding secret discussions, of documents drafted in shadow, of William standing silently but firmly at her side. Many dismissed it as idle speculation, the kind that always clung to royalty. Yet tonight, watching Catherine's steady gaze and Camilla's faltering confidence, none could deny that something extraordinary was building. In the corner, an aide exchanged a nervous glance with another, their eyes betraying the knowledge that a confrontation was near. Some whispered that Catherine carried with her the spirit of Diana, the unfinished justice that the people had long demanded. Others insisted this was less about vengeance and more about restoration, a reckoning, meant to cleanse the monarchy of shadows that refused to fade. Whatever the truth, all agreed on one thing. The stage was set for a public reckoning that would not only define Camilla's future, but rewrite royal history itself. But what appeared to be a carefully staged royal gathering was about to turn into a battlefield where dignity, power, and loyalty collided. For years, Princess Catherine had remained poised and graceful, but behind that smile lay an unspoken war with Camilla, a battle quietly brewing in the shadows of Buckingham Palace. To the world, Catherine was the picture of composure, a symbol of continuity and dignity. Yet beneath the surface, she carried a burden no crown could ease. She had watched as Camilla's influence seeped deeper into the heart of the monarchy. Each gesture, each decision reminding her that the woman once cast as an outsider was now shaping the destiny of the crown itself. What began as quiet unease grew into frustration, and frustration hardened into a resolve that Catherine could no longer contain. The breaking point came in the months after the coronation, when honors once reserved for the most revered were laid at Camilla's feet. Ancient titles, prestigious orders, and the recognition of traditions that should have upheld the memory of Queen Elizabeth were suddenly bestowed upon the new queen consort. To many, it was ceremonial, but to Catherine, it was betrayal. She saw not merely the elevation of Camilla, but the rewriting of history, a history that erased Elizabeth's quiet warnings and buried Diana's sacrifice beneath the weight of protocol. Each ribbon placed upon Camilla's chest was, to Catherine, another insult to the legacy she had sworn to protect. The bitterness seeped into every corner of royal life. Family dinners, once filled with polite chatter, turned into icy exchanges where glances carried sharper edges than words. Behind closed doors, arguments lingered unspoken, tension hung heavy, and Catherine's silence became more dangerous than confrontation. Camilla, emboldened by her new honors, mistook Catherine's restraint for weakness. But Catherine was no longer willing to swallow indignities in the name of peace. Each slight, each decision that put Camilla at the forefront, planted seeds of a rebellion Catherine nurtured in silence. At Catherine's side stood William, steadfast yet cautious. He shared her anger, her belief that the crown was drifting into dangerous hands. But he carried the weight of a son who still saw his father's happiness tangled in Camilla's presence. His loyalty to Diana's memory was unshakable, yet his duty to the monarchy demanded restraint. He urged patience, warned against a public clash that could fracture the institution, but even he could not deny the fire building within his wife. Catherine listened, but she was no longer bound by hesitation. The time for restraint was over. Her loyalty to Queen Elizabeth's memory demanded action. Her devotion to Diana's legacy demanded justice. Catherine began to plot quietly, carefully, ensuring every move was calculated, every word spoken in the right ear. She understood that the monarchy's future depended on more than Charles's reign. It depended on cleansing the crown of shadows that had clung to it for decades. She could not allow Camilla to stand as the embodiment of royal honor when the very idea of her place had been built on scandal, betrayal, and broken vows. This was no impulsive strike. It was a war Catherine had fought silently for years. A war fought not with shouting or rage, but with strategy and conviction. And when she finally chose to move, she did not aim for petty squabbles or small humiliations. She aimed for the heart of Camilla's newfound power. She aimed for her honors, the symbols that elevated her above mere consort into the image of a queen. Catherine knew where the blade must fall, and she prepared to wield it with precision. And when Catherine struck, she struck where it would wound. The deepest on Camilla's most cherished prize, her royal honors. In the dead of night, one document appeared on the king's desk. A royal decree signed with Catherine's hand, daring to strip Camilla of honors she had fought decades to secure. It was not scribbled in haste or born of impulse. It was crafted with surgical precision, every line measured, every phrase sharpened to cut. Catherine had studied the labyrinth of royal protocol for years, mastering its every twist and turn, and now she used that knowledge not for ceremony, but for war. She knew the monarchy lived and breathed by documents such as these, that words framed in official ink held more power than whispers, more weight than fury. This was no letter of intent. This was a judgment, cold and final. The decree itself was simple in appearance, its language restrained, yet its meaning thundered through every corner of the institution. Camilla's hard-won honors titles she had clung to, privileges that had elevated her from consort to sovereign in the eyes of many, were now reduced to ashes with the stroke of Catherine's pen. It was a reminder that in the world of crowns and bloodlines, legacy could be rewritten overnight. The document bore the royal insignia, the seal that made it untouchable, undeniable. Its authority came not from Catherine's rage, but from the very structure of monarchy she had sworn to uphold. By maneuvering through obscure but binding protocol, Catherine ensured the decree could not be dismissed as a personal vendetta. It always stood as law, not opinion. When the final signature slid across the page, the air seemed heavier. That mark was more than ink. It was fate. Catherine knew the enormity of what she had done. The weight of history pressed against her shoulders. Yet she did not falter. For her, this was not only about Camilla. It was about Elizabeth's memory, about Diana's unhealed wounds, about protecting the throne from a shadow that refused to lift. This decree was Catherine's weapon, silent yet devastating. A sword sheathed in formality. Word of its existence spread quietly among those who lived closest to the crown. Some advisors whispered their admiration, finally seeing in Catherine the steel that would define the monarchy's next era. They praised her courage, her refusal to bow to compromise, her determination to uphold the crown's dignity even if it shattered hearts. Yet others recoiled, voices tight with fear. They warned of fallout too great to contain, of Charles's fury, of Camilla's wrath, of a kingdom unprepared for open conflict within its own walls. To them, Catherine's boldness was a risk too dangerous to justify. But Catherine had not written the decree for their approval. She had written it to end a war. Meanwhile, Camilla moved through her days oblivious to the storm gathering at her feet. She carried herself with the satisfaction of a queen who believed her place was secure, unaware that her power had already been undone in silence. While she smiled for cameras and greeted dignitaries, her honors had already been erased, waiting only for the right moment to strike. The irony was cruel. Her victories had never felt so certain, even as the ground crumbled beneath her. The decree was more than law. It was a message, vengeance dressed as protocol, a declaration that Catherine's patience had ended and that mercy would not be offered again. In a monarchy defined by symbols, Catherine had chosen the most devastating one of all. Camilla's honors, once the jewel of her triumph, had been stripped away before she even knew they were gone. But the ink on Catherine's decree was more than words. It was the ticking clock of Camilla's downfall, and the moment of delivery would prove devastating. When Queen Camilla opened the letter, her hands trembled, her crown felt heavier than ever, and her reign just beginning suddenly felt like it was ending. The envelope, innocuous in appearance, carried within it a decree that would shake her to the core. She broke the seal expecting routine correspondence, but what she found was the cruelest revelation of her life. Line after line stripped away the very honors that had validated her place beside the king. For years, she had fought to escape the label of outsider, to be recognized as something more than Charles's companion. And now, in one ruthless stroke, it was all undone. At first, disbelief held her captive. Her eyes darted across the words again and again, searching for error, for some misunderstanding. But there was no mistake. The decree was absolute, written with the finality of stone. Her face flushed with anger as she tried to comprehend the audacity. Who dared to orchestrate such a betrayal? She had survived decades of whispers, endured endless scrutiny. But this was different. This was not the tabloids, nor the disapproving public. This was the crown itself, turning against her. And at the heart of it all was not Charles, but Catherine. The betrayal cut deeper than Camilla could have imagined. Charles had remained her defender through scandals and doubts. Yet this document carried his daughter-in-law's unmistakable mark. It was Catherine's hand that guided this blow, Catherine's conviction that had weaponized the institution itself. Camilla had underestimated her, mistaking quiet grace for submission. Now she realized the truth. Catherine's silence had been the silence of calculation. And it was Catherine, not the king, who held the power to shatter her. Behind the closed doors of her private chambers, Camilla's fury dissolved into despair. The strength she had paraded before the world crumbled as she collapsed into sobs, her body shaking under the weight of humiliation. Courtiers and staff who had once admired her resilience whispered of her devastation, describing her as destroyed. A queen reduced not by scandal or public opinion, but by the icy strike of her own family. For those who witnessed it, the image was unforgettable. Camilla undone not by the people's judgment, but by Catherine's deliberate hand. And yet, while her heart splintered, the monarchy itself moved on without pause. The machinery of the 80 crown, relentless and unfeeling, continued to turn. Engagements were scheduled, duties carried out, appearances made. No allowance was given for Camilla's tears, no sympathy spared for her humiliation. To the world, the royal institution was steady, untouched. But behind the facade, one woman's reign was collapsing before it had even taken root. The letter was more than a document. It was a signal that her position was no longer secure. It told her, in words colder than steel, that her place was fragile, that her authority was not her own. Catherine had ensured that this humiliation was not private. It would echo, it would spread, it would stain her crown forever. The night she dreamed of ruling beside Charles had been replaced by the nightmare of ruling in his shadow, under Catherine's watchful and merciless gaze. Yet Camilla's tears were not the end. They were the beginning of a storm Catherine had deliberately unleashed. What few realized was that Catherine hadn't fought this war alone. Behind her stood William, silent yet unwavering, a future king ready to see Camilla's influence crushed. To the world, William projected calm, careful diplomacy, the image of a monarch in waiting who valued unity above all else. But beneath that polished exterior lay a determination sharpened by decades of buried grief, and an unshakable loyalty to the woman who carried not just his love, but his cause. Catherine may have wielded the pen, but William's shadow was there, guiding her hand, shaping her resolve. Every calculated step she took was reinforced by his unspoken approval, and that silent partnership gave her the strength to challenge a queen who believed herself untouchable. William's position was more complex than Catherine's, but no less fierce. His loyalty to Diana's memory had always burned within him, shaping his views on the monarchy's direction. He had lived through the storm that destroyed his mother, seen the pain she carried, and endured the scars that scandal left upon the crown. To him, Camilla represented unfinished wounds, a ghost of betrayal that threatened to taint the throne he would one day inherit. It wasn't bitterness, it was duty. He could not allow the monarchy's future to be shackled by a figure whose presence still divided the nation. And so, though cautious in public, William's heart aligned with Catherine's every move, his silence more powerful than words. Yet William did not rely on conviction alone. He began to quietly rally allies within the household, building subtle networks of support that strengthened Catherine's position. Senior courtiers who had grown uneasy with Camilla's growing sway found in William a sympathetic ear. Advisors who had once feared Catherine's boldness now took comfort in knowing the future king stood beside her. These alliances weren't forged in grand declarations but in whispers, in carefully chosen conversations, in nods across corridors that signaled a united purpose. Together, William and Catherine created a shield, ensuring that when the blow fell, it would not appear as her rebellion alone, but as a vision for the monarchy's survival. Still, William could not escape the necessity of confronting his father. In private, he warned Charles in words heavy with both duty and sorrow. Camilla's reign cannot last. It was not said as a son to a father, but as an heir to a king. He spoke of public trust, of the dangers of allowing old scandals to define the new era, of the risk of alienating a nation still bound to Diana's memory. His words carried the weight of truth. Yet Charles, blinded by loyalty and love, dismissed them. To him, William's concerns were exaggerations, born of resentment rather than reason. The pleas of his son were ignored, and in that rejection, William's resolve only hardened. By the time Catherine moved to strip Camilla of her honors, the unity between husband and wife was absolute. William no longer sought compromise, no longer hoped his father would see what he saw. He and Catherine stood together, bound by loyalty, grief, and conviction. Their alliance was not simply marital, it was political, strategic, and unbreakable. Camilla may have worn the crown, but William and Catherine now commanded the future, and in that reality, her downfall was inevitable. But William's loyalty to his wife set him against his own father, and the family fractures were now too deep to hide. For King Charles, the decree wasn't just a political crisis, it was a dagger thrust between the two women who defined his life. The wife he crowned and the daughter-in-law who carried Diana's shadow. When news of Catherine's actions reached him, fury was his first response. He paced in silence, his face hardened, his words clipped, struggling to comprehend how such a move could have been made without his consent. Yet beneath the anger was something deeper, something more dangerous. He knew the monarchy had always been a delicate balance between public favor and private loyalty, and now that balance had been shattered. Charles's heart was torn in ways only he could understand. On one side stood Camilla, the woman who had stood with him through ridicule and rejection, the partner he had fought to legitimize against all odds. On the other side was Catherine, the embodiment of continuity, adored by the people, carrying, with her, the quiet grace that reminded the world of Diana. Both women had shaped his path, but now their existence collided like fire and water, and he was left suffocating in the smoke. To defend Camilla meant risking the public's wrath. To support Catherine meant betraying the woman who had given him strength when the world despised him. In these long hours of torment, his mind wandered to words once spoken in private by Queen Elizabeth. She had warned him of Camilla's limits, reminding him that the monarchy demanded sacrifice, not indulgence. Elizabeth had not opposed Camilla outright, but she had always understood that Camilla could never fully embody the crown in the way Catherine could. Those warnings, whispered with the authority of a woman who had ruled longer than anyone before her, now echoed like thunder in his ears. He could not ignore them anymore, but neither could he face the reality they demanded of him. As if the emotional weight were not enough, Charles's own health loomed in the background, turning every decision into a heavier burden. His body, already weakened, seemed to mirror the crumbling state of his household. Each day carried with it reminders of his mortality, reminders that his reign would not stretch across decades as his mother's had. The question of succession was no longer distant. It was immediate, pressing, urgent. And in that urgency, advisors gathered around, him with pleas he did not want to hear. "Side with Catherine," they told him. "The monarchy will not survive if you choose otherwise." Their voices carried not cruelty, but cold pragmatism, the realism of men and women whose lives depended on preserving the crown. They laid out the truth plainly. Camilla's reign was unsustainable. Catherine was the future. Resistance would not only damage the monarchy, but destroy Charles's own fragile legacy. He listened, but each word struck him like a betrayal of his heart, forcing him to admit what he had long denied, that the people would never truly embrace Camilla as their queen. Yet Charles could not bring himself to act. His silence became his shield, his refusal to speak a desperate attempt to delay the inevitable. But to Camilla, that silence was betrayal itself. She had stood beside him through fire, only to find herself abandoned when the flames turned inward. The rift between them widened, not through argument, but through the absence of defense. She saw in his hesitation not love, but surrender, and it broke her more than Catherine's decree ever could. As Charles faltered, Catherine's influence only grew stronger, and Camilla's tears became the kingdom's new spectacle. When the news broke, the nation didn't mourn Camilla's tears. They cheered Catherine's courage, declaring her the true Queen of Hearts. Across towns and cities, whispers turned into applause, and applause grew into a roar that no palace gate could silence. The country had long carried doubts about Camilla's right to wear the crown, and now, with her honors stripped away by Catherine's unflinching hand, those doubts erupted into fury and vindication. The people saw in Catherine what they had seen in Diana decades earlier, a figure of dignity, compassion, and resilience who refused to be overshadowed by scandal or silence. The headlines told the story with brutal clarity. Morning papers splashed with images of Camilla's collapse, framing her not as a victim, but as a dethroned pretender. Television commentators spoke with astonishment, their voices tinged with approval as they declared Catherine's act the boldest move by a royal consort. In modern history, where Camilla had once fought to be accepted, her humiliation became entertainment, dissected on talk shows, spread across tabloids, and magnified on social media. Every replay of her downfall only deepened the perception that her reign had been a mistake, a chapter written in arrogance and erased in justice. Yet beneath the spectacle, deeper emotions were reignited. Diana's tragedy resurfaced with piercing intensity. The wounds left by her death, the betrayal she endured, the tears the nation had never forgotten, all of it returned to the forefront of public memory. People saw Catherine's defiance not merely as an act of personal vengeance, but as an act of historical redemption. She had done what Diana never had the chance to do: stand against Camilla and reclaim dignity from the shadows of betrayal. In living rooms and town halls, the people spoke of Catherine as if she were Diana's heir, carrying her legacy forward with a determination that seemed both fated and divine. Public sentiment crystallized quickly. Polls revealed what many already sensed: Camilla's trust among the people had collapsed. Support that once hovered uneasily in her favor now plummeted, leaving her standing on fractured ground. By contrast, Catherine's popularity soared to unprecedented heights. She was no longer just a princess consort. She was the moral compass of the monarchy, the figure around whom the people rallied. The gap between them widened into an unbridgeable chasm. with Catherine hailed as the future and Camilla condemned as the past. The monarchy itself shifted overnight. What had once been seen as a fractured institution clinging to outdated rituals now appeared revitalized, anchored by Catherine's boldness. Her act of stripping Camilla's honors was interpreted not as cruelty, but as justice for Diana, justice for the crown, justice for a nation that had waited decades for accountability. The unstoppable momentum in Catherine's favor became a tidal wave, reshaping public opinion, redefining loyalty, and pushing the monarchy into a new age where her influence was undeniable. But while the public cheered Catherine, inside the palace walls, Camilla was plotting her last desperate counterattack. Broken yet unyielding, Camilla wasn't ready to surrender her crown without a fight. And what she attempted next threatened to shatter the royal family forever. Her tears had dried, replaced by a steely defiance that few had seen before. She refused to accept humiliation as her final chapter. Rage coursed through her, but it was not wild, it was focused, sharpened into a determination that grew more dangerous with each passing hour. The woman who had once been dismissed as a survivor of whispers now rose with the resolve of someone unwilling to be erased. Catherine may have stripped her of honors, but Camilla would not allow her throne to be stolen without resistance. Her first move was to turn Charles back into her ally. She appealed to his heart, reminding him of the years they had endured together, the scandals they had faced hand in hand, the loyalty she had shown when the world condemned him. Night after night, she pressed her case, pleading that without him, her voice meant nothing. She begged him to remember that her reign was their shared victory, not hers alone. Yet Charles, broken by indecision and weary from the relentless storm, offered little more than silence. His hesitation cut deeper than Catherine's decree ever could, for Camilla saw in his eyes a man torn, unwilling to fight for her as fiercely as she demanded. If Charles would not save her, she would have to save herself. Camilla reached for old allies, calling in favors, pressing contacts, and quietly summoning those who still owed her loyalty. Behind gilded doors, conversations unfolded in whispers. She painted Catherine not as a savior, but as a usurper, someone who endangered the monarchy by dividing it. She asked her confidants to stand against this rising force, to remind the crown that Camilla was not finished. But every promise of support rang hollow. Every whispered word returned to Catherine's camp as quickly as it was spoken. The palace was no longer hers to command. It was already tilting toward the woman she despised. Still, Camilla did not stop. In late-night meetings, her desperation bled into threats. She spoke of secrets hidden in drawers and vaults, of letters and confessions that could ruin reputations and shake public trust. She hinted that if Catherine sought to bury her, she would drag others into the grave. Her words, meant to frighten, instead fueled whispers of instability. Staff dismissed her threats as the cries of a queen cornered, her desperation a sign not of strength, but of collapse. Once feared, her voice now sounded hollow, a storm that had lost its thunder. The more she fought, the more isolated she became. Even those who had once sympathized recoiled, unwilling to risk their futures on a queen whose grip had slipped beyond recovery. And though Camilla refused to admit it, she could feel the truth pressing in from every side. Catherine had already won. The halls, the advisors, the nation, they no longer belonged to her. The more she struggled, the clearer it became that resistance was not revival, but surrender in disguise. But just as Camilla prepared her last move, Catherine revealed one final twist that left no doubt who ruled the palace. In one chilling moment, Princess Catherine delivered the final blow, stripping Camilla of her honors publicly, leaving her crown intact, but her dignity in ruins. The announcement, read aloud before the gathered court, sent a gasp through the hall, a sound that seemed to echo like thunder against the marble silence. Catherine stood unshaken, her voice steady, her presence unmovable, while Camilla's composure shattered before the eyes of the world. Tears streamed as cameras captured the collapse of a queen once defiant, her humiliation laid bare for millions to witness. Charles sat motionless, his face pale, his silence a wound deeper than any word of condemnation. He could not rise to defend, Her, for he knew that to do so would be to fight against the tide of history itself. In that moment, William stepped forward, aligning himself with Catherine, not as husband but as heir, the unspoken symbol of the monarchy's future. The room shifted. The crown seemed to tilt, and the power that had once belonged to Camilla slipped forever from her grasp. This was not just the stripping of titles, it was the passing of authority, the coronation of Catherine in the hearts of the people. And as the cameras captured Camilla's tears, history recorded more than humiliation. It recorded the night Princess Catherine became unstoppable. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one!